She hadn't seen her daughter in 11 years. Not because of a fight. Not because of distance chosen by either of them. Because of a custody arrangement, a misread document, a period of instability, and a legal system that does not always put families back together once it breaks them apart. On a Tuesday afternoon in Los Angeles, she was sitting in the third row of the Family Feud studio audience. Just a woman who had wanted, for one afternoon, to do something that wasn't heavy. Then her daughter walked onto Steve Harvey's stage. And what happened in the 60 seconds that followed left Steve Harvey, an audience of hundreds, and a production crew of decades standing in stunned, full, reverent silence. Her name was Patricia Simmons. She was 52 years old. From Memphis, Tennessee, she worked at a laundromat, had worked there for years, quietly and reliably, the kind of employee that places like that depend on without acknowledging. She had a laugh that came from deep in her body, and a quietness between the laughs that the people who knew her said was the truest thing about her. 11 years ago, Patricia had been in the middle of a difficult divorce. The details were the kind that fill courtrooms with competing versions of the same events, but the central fact was this: a custody arrangement had been drawn incorrectly. A period of instability had been interpreted as abandonment. And her daughter Maya, who was 10 years old, had been placed with her father under terms that, once established, proved nearly impossible to revisit. Patricia had tried. She had hired an attorney with saved money and been told the window for modification had narrowed in ways that would cost more than she had. She had written letters that she was never sure arrived. She had filed paperwork that led to more paperwork. She had prayed in the way that people pray when they have genuinely exhausted every other option available to them. She had never stopped. But stopping the active effort and stopping the love are different things, and Patricia had only ever done one of them. Maya had been 10 years old. Now she was 21. And Patricia knew almost nothing about who she had become. Patricia was not a contestant. She was an audience member, one of hundreds who apply for standby tickets to sit in the bleachers and be part of the energy of a live taping. Her niece Denise had suggested it during a visit. "You need to do something that's just for fun," Denise had said. "Something that's not about all the heavy stuff for one afternoon." Patricia had agreed. She had applied. She had been selected. She did not know who was taping that day. The families competing were brought in through the contestant entrance on a different side of the building. The audience was seated first, row by row, quietly organized, handed their applause when prompted cards. Patricia was in the third row, center section. The first family was introduced. The Thompson family from Atlanta. Bright and ready, the audience clapped. Then the second family was announced, the Washington family from Memphis, Tennessee. 5 people walked out. A couple in their 40s, 2 teenage boys, and a young woman in her early 20s. The young woman was Maya. The body knows before the mind catches up. That is not poetry, it is physiology. The way pattern recognition runs faster than conscious thought. Before Patricia's brain had formed a complete sentence, her body had already responded. She leaned forward. Her hands gripped the armrests. Her breath changed. The young woman on stage was 21 now. 11 years had changed everything observable and nothing essential. She moved the same way. Her chin was the same. The way she pressed her lips together when she was nervous, that particular gesture, that exact one was something Patricia had watched 1,000 times when Maya was small. It was there, right there. Patricia made a sound, not a scream, something older and less controlled than a scream. The people on either side of her startled and turned. "That's my daughter," Patricia said. The woman beside her didn't understand. "I'm sorry?" "That is my daughter." Patricia was on her feet. She did not remember deciding to stand. Her name is Maya. Please, that is my daughter. The floor manager, stationed near the audience section, was there within seconds. He raised his hand to signal the control booth. "Ma'am, I need you to, please," Patricia said. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't making a scene. She was asking with the totality of 11 years behind it. "Please, that is my daughter." The floor manager stopped. He looked at the stage. He looked at Patricia. He looked at the stage again. He spoke into his headset. On stage, Steve Harvey had just launched into his opening with the Washington family. He was 30 seconds in, warm and energized, when his earpiece spoke. His face didn't change. That is 30 years of live television. His face stayed warm and present and completely normal while his brain processed an entirely different stream of information. He slowed his words, asked the families to introduce themselves more thoroughly, extended a bit with one of the teenage boys, gave his production team the time they were asking for. Off stage, 3 people were moving quickly. The senior producer, the floor manager, and a coordinator who had pulled up the Washington family application on a tablet. They were cross-referencing, looking at dates, looking at names. The coordinator looked up. "It checks out," she said. The senior producer closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he spoke into the headset. Steve Harvey heard the situation explained in full in real time, while maintaining an uninterrupted conversation with 2 families, an audience, and a camera operator making editorial decisions in front of him. When he was fully briefed, he said, out loud, addressed to the room, an answer that was also an answer to his producer. "Before we get this game started, I need to do something a little different today. Bear with me." He turned to face the audience. "Is there someone in the 3rd row named Patricia?" Patricia raised her hand. She was already crying, had been since the floor manager moved toward her. She was standing, hand raised, tears running freely, in the middle of the 3rd row. Steve Harvey looked at her. Then he looked at Maya. "Young lady," he said to Maya, "will you look at the 3rd row for me?" Maya turned. She was scanning the audience, curious, slightly confused. And then she found her. The recognition was not slow. It was complete and immediate, the way circuits complete, the way lights come on. Maya's hand went to her mouth. Her knees bent slightly, the involuntary physical reaction to something too large for the body to process upright. She made a sound, one word, that the nearest camera clearly caught. "Mama." And then she walked off the stage. Not running, walking, with the kind of walking that is barely holding itself back from something else. She stepped off the platform. The floor managers were already moving. They had been moving since Steve asked the question. Because some things you do not obstruct. Patricia was climbing over the row in front of her. Someone helped her. She never knew who. They met in the aisle between the stage and the audience section. They held each other. For 60 seconds, and then for longer than 60 seconds. For much longer. 2 people who had lost 11 years held each other in an aisle in a television studio, while an audience of hundreds sat in absolute, total, reverent silence. Nobody spoke. No music played. No producer's voice said to wrap it up. The cameras rolled because this was what cameras are for, not for staged moments, but for this. For exactly this. Steve Harvey stood on his stage. He did not speak. He did not narrate. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him and his face completely unmanaged. And he watched. It was 11 minutes before anything on the stage was said. Nobody rushed it. When Patricia and Maya finally separated enough to look at each other, Patricia holding her daughter's face in both hands, Maya's hands gripping her mother's arms. Steve Harvey walked to the edge of the stage. "Take all the time you need," he said. Patricia looked up at him. She was laughing and crying simultaneously, in the way that only happens when joy and grief arrive together and become the same thing. "I don't know how you knew," she said. "I didn't," Steve said. "God did. I just kept the cameras rolling." The audience, which had been holding its breath for 11 minutes, finally released it into something that was more than applause. The game was never played that day. The producers had decided, within minutes of the reunion, that nothing could follow this. Both families sat together in the audience. The Washingtons, Maya's stepmother, her stepbrothers, held Patricia's hands and looked at each other across a story they had all been living from different chapters. The Thompsons, strangers an hour ago, passed tissues and did not look away. After the taping cleared, Steve Harvey sat at the edge of the stage. He did this sometimes, just sat, while the crew worked around him. A camera operator, packing up nearby, said quietly, "You okay, Steve?" Steve thought about it. "I got into this business because I wanted to make people feel something real," he said. "I've been on this stage a long time, and most days I do that okay." He paused. "But today that happened without me. Today 2 people found each other in spite of everything that had tried to keep them apart. And I was just here, just present." He pressed his palms together. "That's the show I always wanted to make," he said, "right there." Patricia and Maya spoke for 6 hours on the phone that night. Legal proceedings that had seemed immovable began, slowly, to move. The story does not have a clean ending, because these stories never do. 11 years is 11 years. You do not erase it. You begin, carefully and with love, to build something new on the other side of it. But they are building. Together, and sometimes, the world gives back what you thought you had lost forever, in the most ordinary, unexpected place. A television studio. A Tuesday afternoon. A woman in the 3rd row who stood up. Share this with someone who has never stopped looking, and leave a comment. Have you ever experienced a reunion that you still can't fully explain?